My name is Caitlin Montross, and welcome to our panel discussion. In honor of Earth Week, the American Chemical Society has charged chemists nationwide to organize events and bring awareness to the impact that we have on our environment, and specifically draw attention to work that is ongoing in our areas of environmental concern. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our three speakers that we have today, and they're going to discuss the roles that they have in plastic recycling. Our first speaker is Pascal Alexandridis. He has a PhD in chemical engineering from MIT and carried out his postdoctoral research in polymer physical chemistry at Lund University in Sweden. Currently, he is a distinguished professor in the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering with an affiliate appointment in the Department of Civil, Structural, and Environmental Engineering at the University of Buffalo. He has served as Director of Graduate Studies in Chemical Engineering, Co-Director of the Material Science and Engineering Program, and Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Education in the School of Engineering. He is an expert on complex fluids and soft matter with research interests that bridge molecular organization to mesoscale structure and translate these into the formulation and processing of products in a manner that is environmentally responsible and energy efficient. Ongoing research addresses emerging problems concerning pre- and polyfluoroalkyl substances removal and plastic recycling. The second speaker we're going to hear from today is Amy Alduino. She earned a master's degree in geology with a concentration in hydrogeology from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, as well as a master's degree in science education from Niagara University. She spent the majority of her career assessing and mitigating environmental contamination to reduce the risk of investing in real property. She ran the Clean Ohio Brownfield Grant Program for approximately 10 years. After returning to Western New York, she first served as coordinator of Western New York Sustainability Business Roundtable. For the past several years, she has been the Erie County Recycling Coordinator. In this role, she provides planning, compliance support, education, and outreach for municipalities and residents on recycling, food waste, and solid waste management. And the third speaker we have today is Alan Davis. He earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Alan has over 40 years of experience in the waste and recycling industry and has managed integrated solid and hazardous waste facilities throughout New York, New England, and California. He has spent 30 years with waste management and has been involved in multiple landfill gas to energy projects. He is currently the Vice President of Post-Collections Operations and Sales for Modern Corporation, a locally owned solid waste and recycling company based in Lewiston, New York. Alan's responsibilities include the Modern Landfill, Buffalo Recycling Enterprises, and the NEI Transfer Station. Buffalo Recycling is the largest material recovery facility in Western New York and processes over 350 tons per day of residential and commercial single stream material. Modern services 38 municipal recycling contracts in Western New York and thousands of commercial and industrial facilities. We ask that all audience members please remain muted for the duration of the event. We are very grateful. We have a large population of attendance today. We ask that you put your questions into the chat box as they come across your mind. And if they're specific to one of the speakers, please indicate that in your question. After all three speakers have presented, then I will present your questions to each of the speakers in turn. And just for your knowledge, this is being recorded and you will get an email after the presentation letting you know where you can reach that recording for future use. So with that, I ask if Pascal would like to start us off.
All right, I think I'm all set, and thank you for the opportunity, and I hope you can hear me well. I'm Paskalis Alexandridis, and I am at the University at Buffalo. We do research on plastic recycling. However, I want to keep my talk to some very basic facts, and if time allows, I may say a couple of things about our research. So I will start with some numbers, how much plastic we produce and how much we discard. And then I want to make a distinction between mechanical recycling and chemical recycling. And again, if time allows, I'll describe some of our activities at UB. So I want to start by pointing out that plastics are very useful materials. So, maybe they're a nuisance, but they help a lot with food safety. They help with health, and think of all the plastics in the COVID era. Also with energy conservation, think of insulation. So plastics are, again, very useful. Some of them are actually indispensable. So we have an interest to pay good attention to plastics. And because they're very useful, we consume a lot. So if you look on the graph, you see a huge increase from the 60s till today. And I ran the numbers, and with the current plastic production annual, it corresponds to about 100 pounds per person per year. And if you can reflect upon many people on Earth who do not use much plastic, there are many others who use much more. And the projection is that the plastic production and consumption will go up because plastics are an essential part of quality of life. Millions of people's quality of life is improving. They will be consuming more plastic. Now, in the US, plastic industry is part of a chemical industry, which is a net contributor to the trade balance. The US economy relies a lot on the chemical industry, and plastics on its own adds up to about $500 billion annual shipments. It's the 8th largest industry in the US. So clearly there is a benefit for this country and this economy to be active in plastics. I should also add that recent growth in plastic production in the US is also based on the fact that the US is producing a lot of petroleum. And what may not be very well known is that for the past several years, because of shale gas and shale oil, the US is the top world producer of petroleum. So there is a safe supply for first material to produce plastic here in the US. Now, where does all this plastic go? This graph, the thickness of the arrows reflects sort of the volumes involved. And it tries to take into account all the plastic produced. So let me start by pointing out that here in the middle, you see plastic that is still out there, still being used. Think of insulation. You put insulation in a building, it stays there for many years. Now, notice, however, that a very big chunk of plastics, they are being discarded. And some of it finds itself in the water, becomes sort of microplastics, maybe we're even consuming some of them. But it is a big chunk that is being discarded. A smaller fraction is incinerated and produces energy. And the loop that you see in the middle of the graph is the plastic that is being recycled. And you can tell by the thickness of the lines that this is actually a relatively small fraction. And I think all of us are here today because we're interested in doing something better there. So I do want to walk you through some of the plastics and the codes that you have all seen in your products. And I want to start with PET. Soda bottles are made out of it. And this is one of the most widely recycled plastics, about 20% recycled. And as Alan has mentioned to me, they wish they can get more because, it has good value. And the other type of plastic that is recyclable and very much welcome and has value is high density polyethylene. Think of the containers for water and milk. So these are green in my notation. And then on the other side, you said we have plastics like PVC and polystyrene, and they are very small fractions, and they even have their own symbol, 3 and 6, but no one wants them. So in fact, some places don't even accept them in the recycle bins. And then you have plastics that are the low density polyethylene and polypropylene 4 and 5. And these are typically used in packaging. Anything flexible usually is those plastics, and they have value, and they're not being recycled very much because that value fluctuates, but they have a potential of being recycled. So all in all, it's a small fraction of plastic, maybe 10% average than is being recycled. And then how do we recycle plastic? This chart, starting from the very middle, aims to indicate that we have several options. I already mentioned landfilling and incinerations, not very necessarily pleasant options. But a main part of recycling has to do with mechanical recycling. And this is what Alan and his company are working on, and I will have a slide on this. But then there are other ways that you can process plastic, especially the types of plastic that no one wants. And they fall under chemical recycling. And I will present a couple of slides. So when we think of mechanical recycling, this is the one we're most used to. You collect your plastic and someone sorts it. In this cartoon is a person, but can be more sophisticated than this. And then there is a process whereby certain grade of plastic is being cleaned up and prepared for a use. Again, sorting can happen with humans, but can also involve a sophisticated operation. This photo is from the Sims recycling facility in New York City. They operate at the rate of about 70 tons per hour, which is in the order of 7-10 trucks per hour. And you can imagine that they go through this complex process. It involves sophisticated sensors in order to try to identify different types of plastics and pick up what you need. But again, a lot of plastic cannot be used even if you were to separate. And that brings us now into chemical recycling. And the traditional way of chemical recycling is pyrolysis, gasification. So you make fuel out of plastic. And however, there are more sophisticated ways of doing this. And speaking to a chemistry inclined audience, I wanted to bring these covers from CNE News to indicate that there is activity in chemical recycling and a lot of interest. Having said this, some people may argue that chemical recycling is not really recycling, but for sure, it's maybe an additional solution to a bigger problem. And if anything, will make plastics no longer visible. So it goes along the theme of reducing our footprint with chemistry. Now, I think I'm at about the 10 minutes, but I will take my 2 minutes to point out that at the University of Buffalo, we were fortunate to receive funding from the State Department of Environmental Conservation to look at the plastic market, evaluate sorting technology, evaluate recycling technology, and provide some information that may be used for policy. Also, part of this funding allowed people at UB to do some studies as to how you get the message across on how to better recycle. And then we're also fortunate to have received funding from the National Science Foundation to do some more sophisticated research when it comes to advanced methods for sorting plastic and also methods to sort of chemically recycle, but not to the point of making fuel out of it, but try to recover higher value products. And with this, I would like to close, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that the next speaker can take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. Amy.
Here I am. Here. Gotta move this. Okay, what I'd like to talk to you about today is my part of recycling. And my part of recycling is I work with our residents and municipalities to make sure that we are following the regulations and doing outreach and education. One of the things that we have found, especially in the last couple years, is that recycling's gotten really expensive. And one of the reasons it's gotten really expensive is because the economics aren't there, particularly for plastics. It is less expensive to use virgin materials to make plastic than it is to recycle plastic. Therefore, plastic is being recycled for purposes other than economic. Sometimes it's because companies want to or need to have a certain amount of recycled plastic, or for other reasons. Metal is still being recycled because it's economically viable to recycle metal rather than start with ore and move on through. Paper is all over the place, and Alan can talk about that more. And then glass isn't particularly economically viable, but it is very recyclable and it works well with source separation. So why are we still recycling if it's gotten so expensive? Short answer, here in New York State, we are required to recycle. So we do. In a lot of states where they do not require recycling, communities have stopped recycling because it's gotten very expensive. The other thing that's happened, and I'm sure you've seen it, are all the articles and documentaries about what's really happening, particularly in plastic recycling and what is actually being recycled. So what can we do about it here in Western New York? And what we're going to do is we're going to work on a regional unified recycling menu to support municipal procurement and to so that we can have the same sort of outreach activities. And luckily, there are a whole bunch of researchers who are willing to work with us. The eureka moment for us was California has actually put together a recyclability matrix that I'll talk about in a little bit. And we are going to use their matrix looking at the materials that are being collected in Western New York. So Erie, Niagara, Cattaraugus, Chautauqua counties, and determine whether they are actually making it through to be products, new feedstock for new products. So we're going to assess the recyclability and come up with a grade, pass, fail, or borderline. We're going to put together a group of stakeholders to talk about what happens to borderline. I mean, do we want to have them in the matrix, or do we want to keep them out until the conditions are better? And once we have a list of products that are actually being recycled, we are going to put together a unified menu, which is right now, different communities, even ones right next door to each other, will pick up slightly different types. Like this type of plastic can be picked up in this community, but it can't in the next community. With the unified recycling menu, everybody is going to have the same list of what they should put in and what should not be put in. And then the next step is we're going to prepare visual menus of, pictures of the common items that could be put in. And then we're going to work with some UB researchers and customize have a program or a bot or something, I don't know yet, where we can customize based on buying habits. For example, if you eat a lot of frozen and prepared foods, there's certain containers you have, so that if we have pictures of those and they're in your yes or no category, then you will have a better idea of what you should be recycling. So what they're doing in California is pretty simple. This is their criteria. Is material accepted or collected? Can you actually separate it at most of the MRFs? If it is separated, do you have enough of it that you can bale it and, and have it in baleable and saleable quantities? If it's saleable, will anybody buy it from you? If they're buying it from you, are they actually using it as a feedstock for a new product, or are they using it for energy or something else? Does it have a value where the value is greater than the processing cost minus the disposal cost? And also, is it a material that contaminates other products? So it turns out that cartons, like milk cartons that we use all the time, one of the things they found in California is that they don't meet this criteria, because when they flatten down, they actually aren't sorted out, aren't able to be separated into individual bales, and therefore they're contaminating the paper products. And most of what's being collected is still paper. So we want to have better paper feedstock so that most of what's being collected can be recycled. So what materials actually pass this whole matrix in California? Pretty simple things. Paper products. Glass really didn't pass. It was kind of grandfathered in because it's always been collected, but bottle bill glass is recycled, and MRF glass is usually too dirty to be recycled. So not sure where it'll fit into our matrix. Metal is still solid, but in terms of plastics, the only thing in the state of California where number one, PET just bottles, number two, natural colored bottles and colored bottles, and that's it. The rest of the plastics are not considered recyclable. One of the other things that when I talked to the folks in California, they said is it's not just the chemistry, it's actually the form that makes material recyclable. So particularly thermoforms, not because of what they're made of, they can be PET or HDPE, but they crush down to nothing. They can't be effectively separated in a lot of the MRF systems, and therefore they're a contaminant for paper. This ended up being a big deal in California because a lot of these strawberries, especially this time of the year, are from California. And the manufacturers were kind of appalled to find out that the materials that they thought were recyclable really aren't. So what are we going to do here in Western New York? Well, we're going to do a MRF survey and a literature analysis in the spring. We've got some fine folks from Stony Brook coming our way in summer, and they're going to actually do tipping floor waste analysis to see what it is we're actually collecting for recycling. We're going to do a fall stakeholder meetings and talk about what we found in Western New York for the matrix, what's actually being recycled. And then we're going to have a preliminary menu by the winter. Thank you very much. And I am going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Amy. That is really surprising information in some places. Alan, when you're ready.
I'm ready. Thank you. I don't actually have anything to share, so make it a little easier. That way I can't mess it up. Technically challenged. So, all right, I'm going to try to go through basically what happens at a modern day MRF, which we do have here in Western New York. We talked about it, the Buffalo Recycling Enterprise Facility in Buffalo. So basically what this MRF does is mechanically sorts the different recyclables. It's generally all post-consumer recyclables. We're going to kind of stick on the single stream part of that MRF. It does also take what we call OCC or cardboard directly to the MRF that is baled directly, but that's a pretty simple process. So we're going to talk about the single stream portion that comes into the facility. It's post-consumer again. It's coming mostly from residential sources. We have over 38 contracts from local municipalities in Western New York. Material that's collected at the curb and eventually makes it down to this recycling plant. It does about 350 tons a day. It runs 2 shifts, 9 hours each, Monday through Friday, and then on weekends we do the maintenance. It was mentioned earlier about fiber by Amy, and that's true. 65% of what comes in the single stream portion of it is fiber. And every community is very similar, although there may be different things listed on their list and that go into the containers. It's pretty similar when we look at each community. Demographics play a big role as far as contamination, depending on the type of community, the demographics of the community, but about 65% is fiber. Now, when we're talking about plastics, which is obviously our topic, only about 10% of what we see coming in the waste stream, single stream waste stream, is plastics. That's recyclable plastics. We'll talk a little bit more of that later. So when we look at the 1s and 2s, which were mentioned, those are really the 2 plastics that have very consistent, steady markets. That's PET and HDPE. HDPE could be colored or natural, clear. And part of the reason that almost every MRF takes those, and those are very recyclable, is a couple of reasons. 90%, 97% of the plastic packaging, not packaging, but bottles and containers on the market are 1 and 2 plastics. So it only makes sense to go after those because that's the large portion that's out there. There's a lot of talk about the other plastics and why they can't be recycled, but they're a very small portion of the plastics that are out there that are coming through post-consumer collection events and into our facilities. So that's one reason we go after them. Is there's a lot of them. They have good markets. They're pretty consistent. They do fluctuate because they're commodities. And they're also very readily recognizable. So for economic reasons, to sort them, a person that's on a sorting line that's sorting material that's going by there very quickly. I mean, our plant does about 22 tons an hour. Can quickly see that's a milk jug, that's a laundry jug, that's a soda bottle or a water bottle, and sort those. We also use what's called optical sorters, which are very expensive devices, and they can very easily be programmed to sort these 2 types of plastics. So generally, those are the plastics that we go after and that are really going to get us the most benefit. The opportunity is that only about 30% of the plastics produced that are 1 and 2 are getting recycled. So there's a lot more capacity within the system in this country to recycle more of this plastic. There are markets for it. There are products that it can be used to make. A lot of it's plastic lumber, jackets, things like that. But we need to try to capture more of it and get more of it. We do not send any plastics overseas. All of our plastics are taken domestically for their end uses. So I think that's important to understand. We do sometimes go after number 5 plastics, which are polypropylene, and that's your ketchup bottles and your yogurt bottles mostly that we would go after those 2 because they're also both very recognizable, those 2 and then the lids of those. That market fluctuates up and down to a point where we still encourage people to put that on their list of things that can go into their bins, but we have to make sure everybody understands that as the market gets to a certain point, sometimes it isn't worth us to even sort those because we can only get maybe a penny a pound if we're lucky. And the economics don't work to sort it, bale it, ship it sometimes. Sometimes when it goes up like it is right now, it's economical. So we started sorting those again a few months ago. And that's mostly driven, I think, as was earlier spoken about with Pascal's oil and gas prices. Like you mentioned, fracking has really driven down the prices of oil and gas, which obviously the virgin plastics can come from those, and it's more economical than recycled plastic. So that's really, I guess, what we focus on as far as containers are 1 and 2, and sometimes 5. The 3 through 7 containers, again, very, very small amount of the plastic that's produced by a consumer is 3 through 7. Some of the things we're working on with the research with UB that I've suggested is that if there is a economical chemical process developed to handle these plastics, that we could potentially sort the 3 through 7 plastics, basically just be all the plastics that are left after we take out the stuff we want, bale those, and then ship them to a centralized location where there could be a plant that maybe uses chemical processing that takes these bales from MRFs throughout the whole country or the area, and then from there can maybe process them through a chemical process. That's one idea. But again, I think what we have to remember is that's a very small amount of the plastics. The other plastic waste stream that has markets that are very inconsistent, but we try to continue to recycle, are what we call mixed rigid plastics. So those are your larger pieces of plastic. Sometimes it's the little tyke toys in the backyard, the big plastic picnic tables, the buckets, laundry detergent baskets. It's just more rigid mixed types of plastics. So we do take quite a bit of that. And those are larger items too that could weigh a little bit more. And we do recycle those. Those markets fluctuate also a lot. Currently, they're pretty good. So we are moving that material. But that is another plastic that we do keep in the bins, and we do tell people to keep using those. The challenge there is it's kind of hard to fit some of that into your 65 or 97 gallon tote. It has to be cut up to fit into there. So that can be a challenge for us too. But that's basically a summary of what happens on the practical side of plastics recycling at a material recovery facility. And ours is very similar to other facilities. I will caution you though that sometimes other facilities and other communities will do what's called wish cycling, and they may unfortunately let people know that they can put all these different plastics in just to make a bid or something, but there's a good chance that a lot of those plastics are not getting recycled, and they're going right through the recycling plant, coming out the back end, and ending up as residual into a landfill or waste energy plant. Just because, again, it's not economical or there's no market. So that's just something that everybody, I think, has to realize when they hear, well, this MRF recycles this. I would go there, ask for a tour, challenge them and say, can I actually see your bales of number 6 plastic or whatever it is? Because it's really not any economic markets for most of those other plastics. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, so we do have a couple questions that have come through. I'm just going to spotlight all of our speakers. And 1 second. So the first question that came out, and I do think Alan talked about this a little bit, what was being done with recycling synthetic textiles, such as like clothing? Old textiles from the US used to be sent to other countries for sortings, but that market has decreased significantly. Is there anything being done in the US?
I don't know of any recycling of clothing or textiles in this area that's being done. What we do is encourage people to take that clothing, to drop off some Goodwill type places so it can be reused for other clothing. But I'm not aware of any in this area. Maybe you know some.
No, we haven't heard about anything like that. I mean, there are all sorts of webinars and workshops in the recycling world about clothing, but nobody other than reuse, there's not a good second life for it after reuse. And with fast fashion, there's a lot more clothing than there ever used to be. It's a new waste stream that, is showing up more and more in our landfills.
Okay, the next question, this was directly for Pascal. Do you anticipate production of virgin plastic will become more expensive due to the shutdown of the Keystone XL pipeline and more reliance on foreign oil again?
I don't really have the data, but I do want to use the word commodity that Alan mentioned. And I would think that the market responds to any perturbations. And if you close one path, another one will follow. So from my own perspective, the oil price, although it's unpredictable, I think will continue to be reasonable in this context. I imagine that the US plastics industry will still have raw material of relatively reasonable price and also reasonable security when it comes to supply.
Thank you. This one is for Amy and Pascal again. Is the cost difference for glass still significantly higher than plastic or paper, since recycling cost for plastic is so high and biodegradability is so low?
The cost difference? Well, the problem with glass is putting it in a single bin with everything else. Glass in a bottle bill is infinitely recyclable and easily recyclable. So, I mean, what we would like to do is try and figure out ways to get it out of the recycle bin and into a single source, a drop off or something, or to expand the bottle bill so they take more bottles so that will be sorted by consumers and will be far more usable.
I could add to that. I would agree. Glass in single stream systems is very challenging. We would like to see wine bottles and other glasses added to the bottle bill, and also the amount increased so that those glass bottles are taken out and separated at the source. And then, like Amy said, they are very recyclable then, whether it's making new glass bottles or into something called processed glass aggregate. Fortunately, when they get into the recycling single stream system, they get contaminated with food waste, organics, things like lithium batteries, alkaline batteries, just things that make it very, very uneconomical to get them clean enough. Ceramic is a big contaminant too. One little ceramic piece in a whole truckload of glass will totally mess up a whole batch of glass and recyclables. So that's what we support also.
And what I would like to add is that when we think of cost, although you might think how many cents do we pay per pound, there is something called life cycle analysis that tries to include in our consideration about cost many different aspects. And when you do this analysis, and sometimes depending on the assumptions that you make, you may draw other conclusions, plastic versus aluminum versus glass. So my point is that although we all have a perception of what might be more valuable, depending on what we value, we may reach a different conclusion as to what we should be recycling or not.
Thank you. Alan, what are the biggest challenges or barriers to capturing more of the number 1 and number 2 plastics since they're so marketable?
Well, I think it's probably more education because New York State requires curbside recycling to be offered to every single resident, which not every state does. So even in Western New York's rural areas, like we go out into Orleans County and different areas, every resident has access to curbside recycling either weekly or bi-weekly. So it's very easy, it's very convenient. So there really isn't any excuse on that end of it. I think it's more just continuing to educate people, especially our kids, right, in school, so they don't let mom and dad get lazy and throw the stuff in the wrong bin, and getting more of that material into those bins on the homeowner side of it. And then I think there's more opportunities on events. We're working on a sustainability plan with our park here in Lewiston, which is our host community, to try to make it easier to recycle your water bottles and some of the plastics that are produced during those events. So that's another opportunity to try to get more plastics diverted there. And then, of course, commercial, universities, colleges, a lot of them are working on different programs, but I think it's really just education.
Thank you. This is for everyone. Of all the plastic numbers that we've been talking about, which have the largest carbon footprint in their manufacturing, and which would have the biggest impact on reducing our carbon footprint by trying to increase the amount that we recycle of that number?
I think, I can't give you a number, but one of the things that we're seeing is that products are becoming more complicated. So we're seeing multi-layer of many different types of plastics. And then we're also seeing these labels, these full bottle labels, so that you'll have a perfectly recyclable PET bottle, but it has a label which is unrecyclable completely on it that doesn't come off easily. So I think that's becoming more of a difficulty. And then the other thing is that they're light. With plastics don't weigh all that much. It's the paper that weighs a lot and it's the glass that weighs a lot, but if you really want to recycle it more, then you're going to have more sensors and more mechanical and a lot more systems to get it, but you're not going to have huge tonnages of it.
I guess I would add it. I think when you look at carbon footprint or life cycle analysis, like Pascal mentioned, if you're just looking at just like one bottle, like a PVC bottle versus an HDP bottle versus an LD, that'd be one thing. But if you looked at just the total quantity, because there's so much more ones and twos, produced in those kind of bottles, it would be a different analysis. But Pascal's more of an expert on this, but I think probably the worst. PVC seems to get a pretty bad rap, and how you produce that material. So I would vote for that one, but I'm not a chemist.
And I don't have the numbers. I would guess that because most plastics are produced in a similar manner, they probably have the same carbon footprint when it comes to production. But PVC that you mentioned, has other consequences that are negative to the environment. And if you assign value to them, you get to a different conclusion. And I do want to follow up on what Amy said about the plastics that are multi-component. So there is kind of a competition that the people who design products, they're very creative, and they're always ahead of the people who try to recycle them. And I'm aware that the Association of Plastic Recyclers, they have a guide on how you can design products that are still kind of recyclable. So in other words, it may be part of education, maybe consumers ought to incentivize companies that use plastics that maybe indeed, as Amy said, don't cover PET with something that would make it unrecognizable. There are other ways to put a label or assign value. But again, there is a competition between design so that consumers are attracted to a certain product and the ability for recycling. But that can be addressed because at the end of the day, the companies that use plastic have an interest in not polluting the environment. I feel that there can be a better coordination on how the products we use are better labeled, and together with better education, you make sort of Alan's life easier when it comes to sorting. And yes, indeed, there is a market for recycled PET and polyethylene, so that is positive.
Thank you. Alan, you talked a lot about mentioning these markets that you can sell these bundles of plastic to. Where did they go after they're bundled in your facility? What are these markets? Is this kind of seems like it's a profit-driven endeavor? Do plants bid on this plastic of who's going to process them for future use? Is there any incentive of why a company might buy recycled plastic versus using virgin plastic?
Okay, they go all over the place in North America, Canada, and the US. A lot of times they go into a plant that will process them further, clean them, shred them, pelletize them, and then sell that plastic resin back to other people that are going to make something new for them. Very few of them go back into making new plastic containers that are going to hold food, almost none. They may go in to make, say, plastic containers that are going to hold laundry detergent or motor oil or something like that for some of them. As far as the other big markets are for HDPE are lumber, the plastic lumber, the tracks and the different types of documents, and then plastic pots for holding flowers and things like that. There's a Pennsylvania firm that makes the black plastic pots to put trees in and tomato plants and things like that. As far as incentive, yeah, I think your larger corporations that want to show that their product has a certain recycled percentage in it would possibly have to pay a premium to get some plastic pellets that came from post-consumer plastic versus virgin. So they could show that, but that would probably be the only incentive. I don't know enough about their manufacturing process if it has any more cost to them to use recycled pellets versus virgin pellets, but there are definitely some companies that want to have a certain plastic recycling percentage and that would potentially pay a premium.
Okay, thank you. For Pascal, how easy is it to use chemical recycling for amorphous plastics? How does chemical recycling work for plastics that would have a higher Young's modulus?
Yeah, this question relates to something that Alan mentioned about the rigid plastics. Clearly, you have those large pieces and they can be quite tough material. But when we process material, depending on what we want to accomplish, we can always reduce the size. And then that takes care of the ability of, say, a solvent or temperature to do its work. So in other words, I know that we can process these type of materials. If anything, all plastics, if you heat them up, they will become softer and easier to process. From the point of chemical recycling, clearly, at the time of mechanical recycling, you want them to remain rigid so that you can easily keep them separate.
And this is kind of for everybody. So are you seeing any difference when it comes to all of the mask and the maybe increased glove wearing that's been going on with the pandemic? Has that changed anything we're seeing in this field, or has it hampered any of the recycling abilities at the MRFs in any way?
We definitely see a lot more of that material in the single stream flow coming into our facility. It's a residual. It's not getting recycled, obviously. But at this point, it's not really hampering any of our operations. The number one thing that hampers our operations really are the plastic bags from the grocery stores that were recently banned in New York, because we have three-dimensional sorters that separate 3D from 2D items, and there's a lot of rotating parts and disc on these sorters, and those plastic bags wrap around those, and they're very strong in tension when they get on there. Twice a shift, we have to have people go in there and cut all those out and take them out. So those are a big problem for us, along with garden hoses and lights from trees, or Christmas tree lights. Those type of things are what cause us problems, but the mask and gloves are just, to us, just residual.
I think we're seeing masks and gloves more as a litter issue than we are as a recycling bin contaminant issue, where some of our partners, like water keepers, are starting to do beach cleanups. So we're really interested to see with the bag ban if we're going to see less bags than we did, and hopefully we will last year and the years before. And we're expecting to see more masks and potentially more gloves in those cleanups. So stay tuned, and we will see what there is to see.
and I would like to add that what we've heard from talking to people is that during COVID, as the people worked from home, the mix in the recycle bins and in the trucks has changed. So, where you used to collect a lot of trash from, say, restaurant business, now you don't, and this is from home. So the mix has changed a bit. Now, a lot of the personal protection equipment that are used in hospitals and stuff, they go directly to the landfill. So in that sense, that's not an issue for recycling. But I can see in the literature I read that there is awareness that if we end up using face masks much more, that we take care to make them more recyclable. But right now, clearly they are not. But there is a potential.
Thank you. What is the state of the art in biologically derived plastics? For example, can furfural be used as a monomer feedstock? I apologize if I mispronounced furfural.
Yeah, let me start that there are many creative chemists, and you can make polymers many different ways. And there are publications. And I think a couple of plastics sort of that are bio-derived have made it in the market. My personal feeling is that, because the plastics market is so huge, even if you do have sort of new monomers and new polymers, it's not easy to penetrate the existing market. I mean, we invent polymers all the time in the lab, but in practice, I think maybe the newest polymer we use is polystyrene, and that was developed 50 years ago. So that's one thing I wanted to share, that the excitement in the lab takes time and maybe never translates into practice. The other thing I can share is that when it comes to bio-derived plastics, in California, for example, they sort them and they funnel them together with compostable material. In principle, some plastics will decompose in a biological manner, but not in the time scale that the foodstuff will. So that creates a potential problem that although you mix stuff that are all potentially biodegradable, it don't work in the same rate. And you end up maybe creating another contaminant. And that is something that I feel we have to be more careful about, in the sense that we introduce something for a good purpose, but we have to be cognizant of the consequences down the chain.
And that's actually become a real issue. I was on an organics conference last week, and the biggest problem with organics is, plastic containers getting in what you're trying to make into, mulch and compost. And people are now throwing the compostable things in because they should be compostable, but there's actually nowhere in Western New York where we have such a high temperature, high pressure composting process that we could actually process them. So they're not recyclable and they're not compostable, but they're more expensive, and people are buying them for a virtue-driven reason that they think it's okay because we'll be able to compost them, but that's not happening. And they're in fact ending up being a contaminant that has to get out of it before we can take, the mulch or the compost someplace. And a lot of farms have problems taking food waste compost because it's got too much plastic in it.
So I'm kind of getting the sense that a lot of this recycling, obviously it's economic driven, but is there a balance? We see a lot in the news of plastics in water sources, in microplastics, and the PFAS. So is there a balance between kind of what we're environmentally regulated to uphold and then the economics? Is that really what's driving behind the scenes of what gets recycled, and where do these research efforts go?
The effort regulatorily right now in New York State, and we'll see whether it works or not, is something called extended producer responsibility, EPR. And what that is that it's a privatized or a semi-privatized system where the manufacturers are supposed to take care of the materials, the end life of the materials that they produced. That we're starting a paint program like that in New York State this year. So essentially you'll pay a little more for paint, and then in the end, the paint manufacturers have hired a company that will pick it up, will collect it and recycle it. And so they're trying to do that with packaging, including plastic packaging. But how that will actually work, I think a lot of people have, interest/concerns. And I know, Alan, you probably have an opinion about that.
Yes, I do. EPR is big in California, and New York is generally follows suit to whatever happens in California. There's a couple bills pending right now, one in the Assembly and one in the Senate. Us and the rest of our industry are following those bills very carefully. We understand what their goals are and the concepts, but there's really a lot more work to be done before we can come up with a system that's going to be practical and that's going to actually work, and not then get to a point where they're going to take companies like us who invested millions and millions of dollars on the sorting and the processing of these materials, and then come in with a new law that's going to take all those materials away from us and do what with them. And the companies are going to go build new MRFs that produce plastics and paper, things like that. So there's a lot to talk about. But they do work very well for hard to recycle items. I got to say, during my time in California, the paint care program I watched was very successful. Bye-bye mattresses for mattresses, very successful. Those are two products and things that we really don't want in our landfills anyway, and they're tough to deal with. Great programs. They work good for batteries, tires, things like that. You pay an extra fee when you buy these items, electronics, and then to make sure that then they are recycled. So carpet was a tough one. California did not have a very good carpet program. Carpet is basically made from plastics, as everybody probably knows, but the different types of carpet, you have to have a special $30,000 gun to shoot the carpet with this gun to tell you what type of plastic it is, and then it has to be separated by that. So carpet one's been tough, but it also is a product or an item I think that would make sense to have EPR. But regular paper, packaging, and things like they're talking about now, that's going to be an uphill
battle. And if I may add that, plastics recycling is a complex problem and cannot be solved, in any particular way. I mean, technology is available and can be more technology available. The business side is there, and the oil price affects pricing, and policy is important. So I think it's interesting that this panel does combine, academia with industry, with local government, and I feel that the solutions ought to be viewed in a broader context. And as much as each one of us would like to promote sort of our side of the business, in quote, again, the solutions, I think, ought to be collective.
Thank you. And I know we're nearly out of time, so I understand if nobody can stay for the last question, but I do think it's a pretty important one. What can we do when we're at our homes or our apartments and we have things to recycle and get rid of? What can we do to make it easier at these MRF stations that it's going to get recycled the proper way?
Well, I'll start, I guess. Look at the list. I mean, your company that picks up your recycling has provided you with a brochure, a list, or a sticker on the container, or it's on their website. Clearly look at that list and only put in your recycling container what is on that list, nothing else. Like I said, and don't put it in plastic bags and put it in there. Put it in there loosely. Like I said earlier, plastic bags, extension cords, ropes, cables, Christmas lights, those are all big contaminants for us. So only put in your recycling bin what is on the list. Flatten your cardboard if you need to flatten it to get it in there. That's no problem. Fibers are our simplest and biggest thing. Anything that rips can go in there. So all your junk mail, box board, all that, put all that in there. And don't put garbage in there. That's the simplest thing I can come up with, really.
I think you just have to keep it simple. I mean, bottles and jugs, plastic, washed out, clean, just rinsed out, clean. And then your paper, and then your clean metal, aluminum or steel cans. And if it's in doubt, put it in your garbage. I mean, for our communities, if we're paying $45 tipping fee for landfill and $90 tipping fee for it to be recycled, and it's not actually recyclable, it's just a really expensive way to make it to the landfill. So when in doubt, just don't put it in.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of your time, and thank you everyone who attended this talk. Just a reminder, it was recorded, so please look out for that email, and you'll be able to access this at a later date. But thank you very much. I appreciate everyone for being here.